Coming up on the Tall Mike Wine Podcast.
So you came from Canada. When did you get here?
7 years ago.
Now, I know for the last 5 years or so, a lot of the people I know here in America want to move to Canada. So why did you come here?
I moved here for love.
It's
literally
another love story on the Tall Mike Wine Podcast. We're pretty lucky. I get to come here every day. And when I leave the house in the morning, I tell my girlfriend I'm going to work.
She's like, that's not work.
She hasn't caught on yet. She thinks I have a real job.
And now, the Tall Mike Wine Podcast.
The cell phones have been silenced. The wine is poured. And just like that, the podcast begins. Welcome to episode 17 of the Tall Mike Wine Podcast, the wine podcast like no other. Heard in 21 countries. Hello, Poland. On 5 continents and in 42 of these United States. Neither of the Dakotas, in case you are wondering who's not getting on board. New cities on the map. Welcome, Oak Park, Illinois. Rochester and Auburn, Washington. Hello, Salem, Ohio. And thanks for joining the party, Lincoln, Nebraska. That's a new edition of the states list. Wherever you are, many thanks for finding us. Your time is appreciated. And if you're on Apple Podcast, give us a rating and review. They tell me it helps a lot. Regardless of what app you're using, we have a fairly extensive body of work now. Scroll through to be sure you haven't missed anything fun. And they're all fun. Because I said so. Now on with the show. I'm back with a live guest, and we are in the Vintner's Room here in Sonoma at Nicholson Ranch Winery. Sort of the home base for the show, even though we've done some hopping around. I spent a lot of time at this winery since my real job is here. My guest in the Vintner's Room, probably a first for the show. She is Canadian, but she lives here in the Bay Area. She owns a company that sells Canadian wine here in the States, so I guess she's an importer, although I typically think of importers putting wine on cargo ships, going great distances over the ocean. I'm guessing this particular importing involves lots of trucks headed south. Let's find out. The CEO of Kascadia Wine Merchants is Vijay Gandhi, and she's my guest on the podcast. Welcome, Vijay, and hello.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here.
I'm glad you're here, too. Did I get it right? Are you an importer?
I am an importer. I'm also a distributor.
Okay.
And I'm also a retailer. So I know it confuses people sometimes. I just set it up that way.
Usually these things are set up that way, or however way they end up getting set up, because it's better for the law, the permits, and the taxation and all that kind of other stuff that you have to think about when you go into business and you're dealing with wine. There may be other classifications for your particular deal. Importers typically sell their wine to wine shops and things. Do you do that as well?
We do.
Okay,
yep.
So that's the distributor part.
Yes, that's the distributor part. So the importer part is where I do all that trucking business and deal with customs, all the stuff that nobody wants to deal with.
Right.
And people think that the wine industry is glamorous and I just sit around and sample wines all day. Literally, that is not what's happening. Most of my work is behind the desk and customs and labeling office and things like that. The distributor part of it is when I get to work with retail shops or wine clubs, anyone else seeking our wines for more quantity. And then the direct to consumer, of course, is my favorite portion of it, because that's what I initially started off for, was to create a Canadian platform for U.S. buyers.
So this is started out as a website,
yes,
a retail website for Canadian wine for people in the United States who've been deprived of Canadian wine.
Yes, as was I when I moved out here 7 years ago, because growing up in British Columbia, everybody goes to the Okanagan for the summer. And so you're just a couple hours away from wine country, like we come up to Sonoma or Napa here.
Right.
I was used to drinking fantastic BC wine. And so when I moved out here, and my husband and I think one of the things we really connected on is we're big time foodies. We love checking out wonderful restaurants. And I would just flip through the menu and think, we've got wine from Austria. We have wine from Germany. We have wine from everywhere but Canada, and it's one border away from us.
That's so interesting because, like I said, people need to have access to Canadian wines here in the States. But first they need to be told they need access to Canadian wines. Because I think for the most part, most people that drink wine in the United States, there's a block there.
They don't know.
No, the United States of wine is California, Oregon, and
Yep.
Washington. And then we look to Europe or maybe to South America or Australia.
Right. You know what? And that is exactly why when I first started bringing in wines to our portfolio, I actually opted not to have any ice wine, because that is the one type of wine everyone does expect from Canada. And it's not that I don't love ice wine. I love ice wine, but I just wanted folks to understand what else was growing out there. We had Cabernet Francs, we had Syrahs, we had fantastic Burgundian style wines. And that's what I would introduce at first. And it's a massive education piece, right? So when I had my launch party, I had videos of images playing of the Okanagan Valley. And the first thing folks would think is that Lake Como? And it's because there's this beautiful, I mean, when you think of Okanagan Valley, you think of Napa Valley and then a 50-mile lake running down the center. So you see lake life, but then you see these beautiful homes along the lake and vineyards just along the slopes. It's absolutely magnificent. That's how I started to introduce it.
And people think it looks like Italy.
And people thought it looked like Italy because you're kind of living a bit of that, Mediterranean lifestyle,
Sure.
especially when you go out there in the summer. You're laying out by the lake and you do lake stuff all day. Then you go out to the vineyards the next day. Then you're hanging out at your cabin. I mean, it's ridiculous how much fun you actually have out there. But then you've got these incredible producers.
I have a friend that says wine grapes, you can't grow them in anywhere that's not beautiful.
I believe it.
Think about that. Wine country, you go there for the wine, but it typically is beautiful because you have things that wine grapes need to grow. You have hills.
Exactly.
And you have sunshine.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
That was an educational piece. And I did put a lot of time and effort into marketing and getting to know the producers and where the wine was coming from so that I could share that, like spread the good word here.
So you came from Canada.
Mm-hmm.
When did you get here?
7 years ago,
Okay.
I moved to California.
7 years ago. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Now, I know for the last 5 years or so, a lot of the people I know here in America want to move to Canada. So why did you come here?
What brought me here, I have to tell you, it's not like I was running away from anything from Canada. I love Canada. I was in Vancouver, absolutely love Vancouver. I just happened to be on vacation with my sisters one summer. We were in Napa Valley, and the next day we were having lunch somewhere, and I met my husband at a restaurant, and then I moved here for love. That's literally it.
It's another love story on the Tall Mike Wine Podcast.
That's the only reason. That's how I got here. And prior to that, I didn't even work in the wine industry. Sometimes I think it's just that's your fate.
So Mr. Gandhi swept you off your feet.
He did. He was flying into Vancouver to take me on dates every couple of weeks, and I was like, who is this Prince Charming? And we dated for about a year and something, and we got engaged, and eventually we just couldn't spend another minute apart. So I moved here.
Wow. So he's from here.
He's from here, born and raised.
In the South Bay.
South Bay, yeah.
Okay, and you're based down there. That's where all the offices are. That's where the warehouses are, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're glad to have you. It's our gain.
Oh, thank you.
I know a lot of people still want to move to Canada, though.
I can't believe I haven't been to Canada in 2 years.
Oh, well,
otherwise we fly
not
back.
Surprising.
We fly back and forth quite often.
So you move here with your new husband, and you chose to start a wine business. What was the genesis of that?
Very early on in our dating life, I let him know, hey, if we get married one day, I am going to probably have my own business. It's like an entrepreneurial knowing. Sometimes you just know. I think I just wanted to be exactly who I am today. Be a mom who had something she was passionate about and she was working on at the same time. This idea about wine just came to me one night, and I just started researching it, got in contact with a couple of folks I worked with in my corporate career in Vancouver. From there, it just kind of took life. It happened kind of fast and easy in the beginning. I was able to get in contact with the right folks. So the first two wineries I began working with was Painted Rock. I was in contact with John Skinner there, and Meyer Family Vineyards with Jack Meyer. I think if you have a Canadian working on selling a Canadian product, there's a lot of passion that goes into that. And I think that's where everything stemmed from. I was determined to make sure I could create a platform for Canadian wines. And I've always been very intrigued by economics and export and import and things like that. So I think it's a bit embedded in me. It's like I almost can't help it.
The fact that you put it all together as a one-person show is amazing to me, because you're an importer. And that's a lot of fun. Let's meet some people at wineries and we'll import a bunch of their wine. That's going to be a lot of fun. And then of course the real work begins. The work of selling all that wine you brought down here to so you're a distributor, retail, and restaurants, and then you're direct to consumer.
Yes.
With the website.
Yeah. We ship to over 30 U.S. states right now.
That's a huge, huge undertaking.
It was, but I think I started to realize that someone needed to be the voice for Canadian wines in the U.S. Because I was from there, I had a bit of understanding of where the wine was coming from. I think what I realized is I needed to kind of take on the time to educate folks about Canadian wines. I think that was the missing piece because Canadian wines have kind of circulated in the U.S. wine industry for just a little bit.
Right.
And so I said, why not import the wines and be a voice for these wineries?
Yeah.
I've got a bit of a marketing background and I just felt really confident in doing that. And I'm really grateful to the winemakers and the wineries that trusted me to do that for them.
I think that's awesome. We're going to taste some Canadian wine, which you've brought with you. But first we're going to have a little Chardonnay, a little Nicholson Ranch Chardonnay. This is the 2014. You're gonna be blown away by this. 2014 Sonoma Valley Chardonnay. 7-year-old Chardonnay. Do you like it?
It's beautiful. We get to taste more wines later.
We get to taste more wines later? Oh, when we're done with the recording session, we're going to taste all the wines.
Wonderful.
You can see the property and, get to talk to Deepak.
I'm excited. And actually just pulling into the property, I've driven by Nicholson Ranch Winery.
Everybody has.
Yeah. And I've been to Sonoma. This is my third time in Sonoma in the last month. And wow. I obviously love Sonoma.
Yeah.
But all times I've driven right past it. And I always think, what a beautiful property.
We're pretty lucky. Mm-hmm. I get to come here every day. And when I leave the house in the morning, I tell my girlfriend I'm going to work.
She's like, that's not work.
And she hasn't caught on yet. She thinks I have a real job.
Yeah.
So you are from British Columbia. Mm-hmm. However, you told me right before we started that you're not from there. You're from somewhere else.
I was born in the Fiji Islands. And my family and I moved to Canada when I was, I believe, 4. And the rest is history. Then I was just a Canadian girl.
So you were tiny.
Teeny tiny.
Family picks up and moves to this strange continental place, and you're now
from the tropics to the snow.
Yeah, you're no longer on an island surrounded by blue water.
No kidding. Yeah, but it's always fun to visit.
Sure. When was the last time you went back?
Actually, I was there 2 years ago.
That is awesome.
It was beautiful. Yeah.
And now you have a couple of small ones yourself. There was some new additions to your family during the pandemic. You and your husband had not just one baby. You had 2 babies.
Yes.
Was it right during all of the madness?
It was.
When were they born?
July 5th of last year.
Okay, so just a few months into the pandemic.
Yeah, just a few months into it. I guess when the craziness started, that was kind of March of last year, right? Before the shutdowns happened. So we didn't see it actually coming. We didn't realize it would get that serious.
Right.
But you just deal with it.
Sure.
Like you would deal with the childbirth for any child, right? You just have to deal with whatever's happening, whether or not people are in hazmat suits around you or whatever. It was real.
You'll just be wearing a mask.
Yeah.
But everything went well.
Everything went well. They were very healthy twin babies, beautiful. They're ankle biters now, a year in. I'm a full-time mom, but I also run a business, and I'm not the only full-time mom that runs a business. And it's nice to actually connect with that community these days. And I really admire moms like I've never before.
It's the job that I think now more and more people recognize that being a mom is in and of itself the hardest job.
It's a full-time job.
That there is.
Yeah. Which is why I was so excited to come out here and meet with you, Mike, because I'm like, okay, I get to go to wine country for a day for work. Mom's going to work.
Hooray. So how was business during the pandemic? We had to shut down here at the winery, but we put a lot of our wine on sale on the internet, and we sold a whole lot of it. Yes. Granted, it was highly reduced in price.
Right.
Mostly for our wine club members, and we sold a ton of wine. I'm guessing web wine sales, from what I've read, went up.
It did.
Same for you?
It was wonderful for me because I'm only online wine sales. I mean, other than some of the brick and mortars we sell to, but we had to import a little bit more. And in that time frame, of course, there were other things happening other than the pandemic as well. Last year, there were some of the fires occurring along the Pacific Northwest. I just now 7 years into living in California, I feel a little bit more part of my community. Yes, I import Canadian wines, but I'm also now a Pacific Northwest girl. I'm living in Northern California. We drive drive over 7 minutes to enjoy wines from Santa Cruz. We come to Napa, Sonoma, wherever. There were a couple of wineries I've connected with that we now have included in our very petite Pacific Northwest portfolio, which is right now we're working with a winery from Oregon and another one from Santa Cruz. But that was one change that we made, a slight change.
You're expanding just a tiny bit.
Just a tiny bit. And of course,
hopping across the border?
A little bit. But Cascadia, I named my business after, of course, the Cascade Mountain Range. Runs from British Columbia all the way to Northern California. You know, folks don't realize, but British Columbia is actually part of the Pacific Northwest.
Yes.
Geographically.
Well, I looked at the Okanagan wine map just a couple days ago in preparation for your visit, and it starts right at the border, and it says that's the warmest part. So that's where they're growing all the warm climate grapes.
Exactly.
But it doesn't go too much further north.
Nope.
By the time you get just a few clicks to the north toward the end of the region, then it's a much more moderate climate. And then the cooler climate grapes.
Yeah,
You've
exactly.
got Pinot up there and Riesling.
Pinot, Riesling, beautiful Pinot Gris as well.
They really have all the flavors. Actually,
the wine we're tasting today, it's from Southern Okanagan.
I think we should pour this wine.
Let's do it.
This is from a winery called Poplar Grove. And Poplar Grove is
It's in the Penticton area. The wine that we're tasting today is the 2016 vintage of the Legacy Red Blend, predominantly Cabernet Franc, which is one of my favorites for a red blend. So 33% Cabernet Franc, 25% Malbec, 15% Merlot, 14% Cabernet Sauvignon, and 13% Petit Verdot. That was a mouthful.
They got all 5 of the Bordeaux grapes in there.
Yes, and this one here won gold at the London Wine Competition and has been rated 96 points in decanter, which is why I absolutely had to bring it along. This was great. These grapes have been grown in Osoyoos, which is in the Sonora Desert region, and that's what you'll get in here.
Okay, I get a lot of spice on the nose. That spice in the form of a little bit of bell pepper, and then it goes right into something I associate with Cabernet Franc, rose petals.
What I find about the reds in even in the Sonora Desert region, very herbaceous, very structured. Another varietal that does really well out there is Syrah. Cabernet Franc, Syrah, Petit Verdot. And you don't always see a lot of Petit Verdot in these blends, but it's 13% in here, which I think is like the perfect finish for it.
It gives it some nice color, too. Petit Verdot is one of those really super dark colored grapes.
Yeah, I love it.
That they add to the classic Bordeaux wines in France to make them a little darker colored.
Yeah.
This is really delicious. It's not what I would call a fruit bomb. It's actually got a lot, like you said, herbaceousness to it.
Yes.
And spice.
Yeah. Recently, I tasted a wine from Sonoma. And, you know, when I get up to new wine regions or regions I'm not as familiar with, I want to know from the locals about where they're growing their grapes, where they're sourcing things. And I was at a wine tasting room here and I tasted a Zinfandel. It's not what I would usually taste in a California Zin. And it was more herbaceous, but they said they sourced it from, is it Moon Mountain?
Moon Mountain.
Yeah.
That's here in Sonoma.
Exactly.
It's, kind of up that direction.
Okay, yeah. So, and it was very herbaceous. And I said, I'm familiar with herbaceous wines. I plan on now saying yes to more work trips because the more you get out there, the more you're understanding and learning and connecting with your community.
You got to get out. You got to taste the wine.
Yep, absolutely.
You have to be of the wine community. You can't just sit there on your website.
Exactly, behind my desk.
Look at me on my website selling Canadian wines. No, you have to go out and meet the people.
Exactly. And you know, honestly, that's been the best part about when I first got into selling Canadian wine in the U.S. Someone made a comment one day and said, "Are you crazy? You want to sell Canadian wine in the Napa wine region or Sonoma wine region?" I said, listen, this is a very wine-educated demographic. It's not like they're sitting under a rock. They know wine and they want to try new things.
No, and I think people are always looking for new things.
Absolutely.
And they just don't know it sometimes.
Yeah.
You could go the rest of your life and never try Canadian wines, but as soon as you find out there's a website that sells Canadian wines, you're like, I want to look.
Exactly.
I want to see. I'm
absolutely.
Curious.
Absolutely. I think even our portfolio, notice it's like we pick producers like a needle in a haystack. We're bringing in some of the best wines.
Well, and the thing about your website, at least as far as I can tell, the wineries that you're working with are mostly small wineries.
Yes, small production.
Because they're not making it in mass quantities. They're not making it to sell a bazillion cases to Costco or something like that.
I think most of the producers we work with are under 10,000 cases.
Wow.
I think small quantity, high quality.
Is there a term that Canadian wineries use for Bordeaux-style blends? Here in California, some wineries use a thing called meritage.
So when you say meritage, are you just talking about, probably love to hear more about what you're...
Back in the 80s, when it became apparent that the Bordeaux-style grapes, or the grapes from Bordeaux, Cabernet Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, Malbec, of course, most everything we do in this country is based on traditions from Europe.
Right.
And of course, the tradition in Europe, in the Bordeaux region of France, is to blend those grapes together. So when people started doing it in California, instead of saying, this is our Bordeaux-style blend, they came up with this word. They had, I think they had a contest.
They had a contest?
No.
Really?
I think you can fact check this. There was a contest, and the word meritage, if you look at it, you want to say meritage. But they say
it's meritage.
It rhymes with heritage.
Yes.
So it's meritage. And then there is a meritage society. If you want to call your wine meritage, you've got to pay in. So some wineries use the word meritage, some wineries do not. But it was one of those things they developed so they wouldn't have to spend so much time saying this is a Bordeaux-style blend of grapes grown in California, just like they would in the Bordeaux region of France. You just say meritage and people know, oh, that's going to be their Bordeaux-style blend. So maybe the Canadians need to come up with another word.
Another word. I think based on my personal experience working with my suppliers, I would say we're probably sticking to Bordeaux blend as of now. I haven't heard it come up with any other. They haven't come up with any other new words. So
okay.
But I think when they're showcasing their wines to me, even personally, it's all about the Bordeaux blend.
Sure.
That's where we're at.
Well, it's delicious. Poplar Grove is the name of the winery. The Legacy. 2016.
The owner, Tony Holler, and it's a family business as well, estate grown. I'm really proud to be carrying their wine out here, and I'm just happy to be sharing this wine especially. See, this is how I pick my wines. It literally has to be the best of the pick.
Yeah, you got to taste them.
Yeah, we taste them. You look at the accolades, but you have to taste them. And we work with a wine consultant quite closely. And I really studied the market. Palates are different across the U.S. And one thing as an importer I've realized, and a distributor, folks on the East Coast sometimes purchase things differently than folks on the West Coast. It's something I've gotten to know over time.
It's a really different life.
It is.
All over the country. People in the southern part, people in the East Coast, people in the middle of the country.
Right.
It's almost like entirely different countries.
It is.
Really?
Yeah, we sell more ice wine on the East Coast and more red wine on the West Coast, for example.
There you go. So what were you doing before wine came into your life? You were up there in BC. You said you were working in the corporate world. Now that sounds like a real job.
I had a real job, believe it or not. And then I worked in, marketing and finance for the BC Olympic Games Secretariat. So for the 2010 Olympic Games, I actually happened to work for one of the partners for VANOC. That's kind of where my first experience of wine occurred. I was working for the BC Media Center, International Media Center. So CNN and all the athletes were coming in that 2-week period because you're working in the office and then the games arrive and they have to stick you somewhere. So luckily for me, I was in the International Media Center and I was an event coordinator, and they said, okay, we've got 45 BC wineries rolling through and we want everyone to get access to it. You're in charge. And I'd never tasted wine in my life. This happens, and I just fell in love with it. And for the rest of my 20s, I was hosting wine and tapas nights in my apartment in Vancouver. And I think most folks that knew me from then on knew that eventually maybe I would get into wine because it just became such a love of wine.
You had your conversion.
I had my conversion from that first sip.
It was sort of a trial by fire.
It was. And so, sometimes I love hearing how folks get into wine.
Yeah.
Because something happened at some point.
Yes.
There's like a moment where you're like, wow, I love this. Yeah.
Unless you're born into it.
Unless you're born into it.
And I don't think a lot of people that were born in the 60s and 70s grew up in houses in the United States anyway, where there was a lot of fine wine.
Right.
Because there wasn't a lot of fine wine. And anything most people considered fine wine was from Europe back in the day. So I grew up in a house where there wasn't any real fine wine. I mean, my mom would bring out the bottle of Lancer's Rosé once in a while.
Yeah.
That's Spanish wine.
Right.
And it's not very good.
Right.
It wasn't until I got out into the world and moved to a part of the state of Washington where there is wine and just happened to tag along on some wine tasting trips that I'm
Right.
like, oh, wine is a thing. Okay.
So before Washington, where were you living?
I'm born and raised Washington State.
Oh, you are. So
Yeah.
you just were not close to the vineyards. at
No,
that
I grew up on the west side of the state.
very cool.
Just south of you in Vancouver. I was just outside of Seattle.
Oh, beautiful.
And Canada is amazing. I've spent some time in Vancouver, but the town I really like is Victoria.
I was just talking about the Fairmont Empress Hotel today because we went to the Fairmont in Sonoma, and parts of it reminds me of
Oh, is that owned by the Fairmont now?
Yes.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So we had a sailboat, a small sailboat. We weren't fancy, but we would sail across the Straits of Juan de Fuca in this little 24-foot sailboat. That's where I learned about seasickness.
That's my
At the end of a very long and grueling day of getting through the waves, crossing the straits, you pulled into this magical harbor, Victoria. The waterfront is there, and the marina there is beautiful, and there is the Empress Hotel with all the holly and the ivy crawling up the front of the building. And I don't know if they still do this, but at 4:00 every afternoon, they used to have a bagpiper on the roof.
Oh.
And he would play, and they would amplify it all throughout the
how
whole
neat.
marina. So you would just sit on the boat and wait for the bagpiper to come out and play his little set.
Well, that's the thing about Victoria. It still has that beautiful essence to it. Very traditional. You do get that little bit of that European flair for me personally. When I used to go out there after the Olympics, I worked for the government for quite some time. And so I just would fly back and forth to Victoria, even during the Olympics. That's what we looked forward to. It was a nice dinner in an Italian restaurant by the water.
It's a real cosmopolitan city.
Yes, English tea at the Empress every afternoon.
Right.
And then you get into your dinner in the Bengali lounge and something else.
And even the paper money is more attractive in Canada.
Well, folks here tell me it looks like play money. They're like, it just looks like plastic.
Oh, it's nice and
I'm
colorful.
like, do you know how long it took me to get used to handling U.S. cash? Because it all just looks the same.
And then something I really appreciate about Canadian money is the loonie and the toonie.
Yes.
Because you've got a $1 and a $2 coin that people actually use.
Right.
And you can have a pocket full of change. You can have like $20 in your pocket.
Exactly. That's what we use for school lunches.
Yeah, the toonie is cool. It's the coin with the gold thing in the middle.
Yeah, exactly.
Love that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So have you been on a lot of other podcasts, VJ?
I have not, but I do have a couple upcoming. So this would be the first podcast I've ever been a part of.
This is your first podcast.
First podcast. Super
Wow.
excited to be here. How did I do?
You did great. You did great.
Good.
This is the part of the podcast where I ask you if you listen to podcasts. I know you've listened to this one a few times.
Yes.
You said you were listening to it when you were up here with your husband tasting wine in Healdsburg a few weeks back for your birthday.
Yeah, I think we were actually, is it Healdsburg? We were in Sonoma. We were at a little cabin in Sonoma, 15 minutes from here.
Oh, okay. It's all wine country. It's all beautiful.
It's all the same.
So do you have other podcasts you can recommend?
I would say, as of right now, I want to recommend folks to listen to your podcast.
Oh.
Yeah. I really, from the first time I listened to your podcast, I found it to be very personable. I love that you're not just talking about wine. You get to banter about life a little bit and where folks come from. You talk about wine, but yeah, it doesn't have to be so nitty gritty. I'm personally, in the last year, I can't even count how many virtual tastings I've been a part of from my rocking chair in my master bedroom, because that was the way of life for the last year and a half. And I love to just chat about the wine, but I also like to chat about other things, because wine to me is a lifestyle, isn't it?
It's the gateway to so many other things.
Absolutely.
When you talk about being social, it's let's have a glass of wine. And then, sure, what wine is this? Oh, I'll tell you what wine it is. And then we're done talking about wine. To me, that's the essence of wine, is it gets people together to have a good time and to chat about all sorts of things. So
Absolutely.
if this podcast focuses just on wine, to me, it's boring. It's just like anything you watch in the media. You start to look at people or hear people and you want to know who they are. You'd like to know more about them. And the more you know about them, the more you feel like you know them, and then you want to continue to watch them. So if you come on and just say, I'm just talking about wine, there's no connection. Everything about them, like for you, we just found out that you worked in the corporate world with the Olympics, and then you came to the United States. Was there anything else you did up in Canada before that?
Right before I moved here, I worked corporate, but I really wanted to work with people, and eventually I went back to school. But I went into working in behavioral health, and so when I moved to the U.S., I continued my career in behavioral health, and that's actually one way I got to know the Bay Area, because you have to travel everywhere to meet with clients and therapists. That was one of the perks of my job when I first moved out here.
So you were working with families and kids.
Families and children, beautiful children, and whether they were on the autism spectrum or in Canada, I was also working on some curriculum writing projects and then working with teachers in the district. So I've loved my career so far. Going into wine, didn't see it coming, but I'm not complaining.
You don't get to complain.
Nobody in the wine industry gets to complain. This is a fantastic industry to be a part of.
You get to be happy that you're here.
Yes.
And that wine is very accessible.
Exactly.
If you could share a bottle of Canadian wine with any Canadian, living or dead, who might you choose? I know who I'm going to say.
Shania Twain.
Oh.
She's still my favorite Canadian artist.
That's right. She's Canadian.
And I have this dream that eventually I'm going to attend one of her concerts. And
is she still out there doing concerts? I thought she lived in like Switzerland or something.
Well, that's the thing. It's confusing. And so I tried to look up last year if she had any concerts. I mean, in the last 2 years, there's no concerts. But I want to know when she's coming to the U.S. so I can attend a concert.
Right.
And whether my husband likes it or not, I'm just going to drag him out to it.
Get him a cowboy hat.
Yeah,
He'll be fine.
Exactly. But what happened was initially when we moved to Canada, we lived in Calgary. So I grew up with country music to start and then moved to the West Coast, right? I really admire her journey as a person because life was a little tough for her to start. And then her music was just phenomenal. And it just seems like she's just so sweet on the inside, outside and inside.
She was one of the biggest stars in the whole world for a while.
Yeah,
Shania Twain.
In my eyes, she's still a star. So
That's
if I had
awesome.
to share wine with someone who I desperately want to attend a concert, it would be Shania Twain.
I think I would choose Paul Schaefer.
Okay.
Do you know who that is?
No.
Paul Schaefer was the band leader on David Letterman's show.
Okay, now
Remember?
I know who you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yes,
the guy with the funny glasses
Yes,
and the
okay.
guy, the really excited guy about the music.
Yes, exactly.
You know, when I think of Canadians, that's one of the first people I think of is Paul Schaefer.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, he's from like Thunder Bay or something, Ontario.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of fun Canadians. I mean, there's so many.
Oh, there's
Canadians.
a ton. There's so many famous people that we think of as just famous people. You don't know they're Canadian. You can go all the way back to like Neil Young is Canadian.
Exactly.
Most of the staff of the first cast of the Saturday Night Live in the 1970s were Canadians. Yeah, exactly. Dan Aykroyd, Canadian.
But there was an event in the East Coast recently, and Dan Aykroyd was going to be attending, and I was invited. I said, I can't believe I can't attend this because of my kids.
Oh, no.
Isn't that terrible?
That's all right. You'll get to meet Dan Aykroyd one day.
Oh, that's too funny.
Maybe Shania Twain.
Oh, I'm hoping so. I just can't believe I've never been to a concert yet because I'm seriously such a fan.
Shania, if you're listening, come to Sonoma.
Please.
We've got Canadian wine. We've got California wine. We've got everything you need right here.
Big fans.
Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thanks for bringing the wine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Delicious.
Yeah.
It is Poplar Grove, the legacy.
Poplar Grove.
Oh, here are your coasters, by the way.
Thank you.
These are for you to take with you.
These are very
These are the
cool.
official Tall Mike Wine Podcast coasters.
Oh my goodness. I love the artwork.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Tall Mike Wine Podcast was conceived, is written, edited, produced, and maintained by yours truly. And I'm also the janitor. If you have anything you'd like to contribute, ask a question, suggest a guest, suggest yourself to be a guest, or if you'd like your very own Tall Mike Wine Podcast coasters, please email me at tallmikewine@gmail.com. To see what we're up to today and other days, follow me on Instagram at Tall Mike Wine or follow VJ at Cascadia Wine Merchants. That starts with a K, by the way. Are you currently listening to Apple Podcasts? You'd be doing me a huge favor if you rated the podcast, and writing a review would be a great help as well. That's episode 17. If you've missed the previous episodes, get yourself caught up. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in the Vintner's Room again soon with another one. But for now, from Nicholson Ranch Winery in Sonoma, California, I'm Mike Stone. Cheers.